This is Brad LaPorte. I'm a Gartner veteran for cybersecurity, as well as an industry expert and a partner at High Tide Advisors. Today, I'm joined by CEO and co-founder Paul Ayers. It's great to chat with you today and learn more about Noetic Cyber, Paul.
Thanks, Brad. Great to be here.
So we've known each other for a long time, directly and indirectly, and it's been an interesting journey. We both worked at IBM on different sides of the table. One with you, bringing one of the first SOAR, so security orchestration automated response tools, to the market, and me on the other side working with the mergers and acquisitions team and onboarding Resilient as part of the larger IBM structure. So it's been very interesting watching it develop, especially given the time frame, going back 2015, 2016, and then actually building it out well before that actually became a thing. I mean, SOAR didn't even have a name back then. So, it'd be great to understand at a high level, how you got from those days to now. What have you been up to?
Sure, no, happy to. And that was a great journey at Resilient, and also having been through 5 other acquisitions. IBM did a great job on taking the technology and integrating the team and really, accelerating the business. But often is the case when you're in one particular company, you start to see the opportunity for the next new thing. And actually, myself and my 2 co-founders, we were all early stage employees at Resilient. And if you think about that technology, and as you said, as it evolved, certainly when we started, we were the only game in town. It was very evangelizing a new approach to response. And as the market evolved, it became what we now think of as SOAR. And a lot of that was orchestration and automation and bringing that kind of technology to the cyber world. But I think a couple of takeaways that we took from Resilient. One is, if you boil it down, automation really requires certainty, and we were applying it in response, which is a very uncertain part of the ecosystem. And we also spent a lot of time with CISOs and particularly teams in security operations. And we saw that a lot of people were kind of in firefighting mode, dealing with cyber-related incidents, and they struggled to look at kind of post-incident reality of how they could be more preventative and try and stop those fires from starting in the first place. So we took some of that kind of thinking in terms of how can we take a new approach in our new venture, which we started recently in Noetic.
Yeah, it's amazing to see how you were able to pioneer not one, but multiple different markets. So previously, your other startups, you specifically, at Resilient, some really amazing work. So I'm very excited to see Noetic Cyber evolve over time. And so basically you've done it again with now CAASM. So cyber asset attack surface management, which is a term that's coined by Gartner and was recently highlighted in Gartner's hype cycle for security operations and cloud security in 2021. So, Gartner defines it as being an emerging technology focused on enabling security teams to solve persistent asset visibility and vulnerability challenges, very important areas. It enables organizations to see all the assets that, both internal and external across, all the API integrations, existing tools, and being able to look at that consolidated data with high confidence and identify the scope of the vulnerabilities and gaps in the different security tools, and be able to remediate that effectively. So, with the whole automation on the back end. So it's a very important area. Certainly has gotten a lot of traction in the market since it's come to fruition. And really, looking back, it's quite interesting to see the evolution of the attack surface management space in general. Going back to 2019 at my Gartner days, it was one of the things that were really identified, and organizations just didn't have visibility into their attack surface. They didn't have high confidence and able to take actions on their environment. And they were looking for the ability to consolidate and have that single point of view, that single pane of glass, so to speak, and look at their company assets across the board. And unfortunately, a lot of the clients that I met with over the years, they they were managing things out of an Excel spreadsheet. They didn't really know how to identify things like shadow IT. And, when you're starting to think about, a typical hospital or healthcare organization, or even a manufacturing organization that has a lot of different operational technology or IoT devices, all that is, really complicated and complex to do, especially if you're forced to do it from a manual basis. So it's certainly interesting, and I know that Noetic Cyber has a pragmatic approach. I love the name. I love the whole concept. So I'd love to dig into it a little further.
Sure, no, happy to. And we're pleased with that initial naming. Obviously, we started the company 2 years ago now. So when you're at the kind of innovation side, you're waiting to see how the market's evolved. And I think CAASM is still maybe 6 months or so sort of out as a term in our industry, but it's very apt. And really, I guess what we're answering are some of the fundamental questions that, should be simple, but are really tough in today's environment, which is really, what is it I'm trying to defend? And to do that, you need a cyber lens of your most critical assets. And that's a lot of data to truly understand. And when you really double click and look at that problem, you recognize, first of all, not all assets are equal, and you have a lot of data to try and understand. So you have to kind of take almost a data science approach to the problem and really dig deep on the assets and how they connect and how they're related. And it's very much around, the relationships that give you the context to enable prioritization. As I say, not all assets are equal. So there's a difference between, having risk or vulnerabilities on a system, a computer, or a user that's behind 3 layers of firewall versus that same system on a public-facing network. And so, step one is understanding all that data, understanding the relationships, mapping that, giving the context to enable the user to start prioritizing and making key decisions. And that's kind of phase one, if you like. What we've also tried to do here, if you think about that, that gives you a rich lens of your current state. What we're also trying to do is build a second lens that's as often a kind of related, but sometimes sort of differently, which is, well, what's my desired state? How should things be? And then we're looking at these kind of 2 data sets, and that's where we're applying all of our experience around orchestration and automation. So it's kind of like state-based automation to understand current versus desired and really look at self-correcting that environment so that we're kind of addressing the hard fundamental posture management of protecting your critical systems and assets.
Yeah, that's a great point of view. And one of the key questions on the mind of a lot of buyers right now and a lot of organizations and enterprises I've interviewed over the years is, they're especially looking to consolidate and streamline their ecosystem, all the different security tools that they have, all the IT operations tools that they have, and get the most value out of their existing tool sets and effectively have a return on investment. And historically, over the past 20 years, arguably it's been a best effort approach. So now a lot of organizations, it's kind of like show your work exercise. So they're being able to quantify, having the solutions that they have. And in a lot of cases, I've had organizations come to me and say, in order to implement a net new tool, I need to remove 2. So it's certainly been a lot of focus in this area, and a lot of focus on key metrics, key performance indicators to drive things forward, and being able to allocate their budget appropriately. So I don't know if you have any additional context or items specifically on that.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and we've all seen different stats. It's a broad range. You hear 40, you hear 80. I've spoken to a large financial organization that's got more than 400 different tools, not 400 different vendors, in their ecosystem. So, and if you think about that, those have evolved. They've all got their own perspective on certain data. They all have their own format for that data. So, the avenue we're pursuing there is you've got enough technology, you have a lot of data already, but let's unify that. If you could take the gold from all of those different tool sets and bring it together in one place and make it actionable, what would that do for you? And, it means you can drive faster, you have a more complete picture, but also it's driving a lot of efficacy of existing investments. Because these products are great at what they do. Your EDR agent, there's a very mature market there, but they can't tell you where they're not deployed, or they can't tell you if they're misconfigured, or tools that find vulnerabilities and alerts, they can't tell you, is that a business critical application? So I think what we're trying to do here is enable, first of all, rapid time to value, really driving efficacy of your existing tools, and making sure that we're closing any coverage gaps, any toxic combinations in your environment. And you talked about replacement there. I think the other macro challenge we have in our industry is the human capital challenge in terms of the skills shortage. And we've got to find ways of using tooling that can take action wherever possible. I think a lot of CISOs and security practitioners I speak to are just like, don't give me another dashboard of pain. Focus on outcomes. And so, we try to bring that into our design thesis, where we're bringing new context and visibility, but again, leveraging our previous experience, so you can take that data and drive action and outcomes. So it's kind of like I identify a challenge once and then fix it continuously. And we've had a lot of great feedback on that, because it's really upscaling and driving efficiencies within the limited teams people have today to address the cyber challenges.
Yeah, talk about hitting the nail on the head. I'm glad you brought up automation, because it's definitely a hot topic. It's certainly on the front page of every newspaper everywhere. And there's certainly a serious skills shortage around the world. I mean, right now, over 64% of organizations are reporting a serious skill shortage in their environment. They don't have enough resources to execute on their cybersecurity mission. And overall, there's 3 million vacancies for cybersecurity positions worldwide. They just can't be filled. I mean, we don't have the bodies to actually fill them. And one of the ways that this can be addressed is through automation, as you highlight, and helping organizations first be proactive with addressing and mitigating these threats from happening in the first place, but overall just reducing the risks and the overall risk exposure, and being able to help on the detection and response aspect, so the remediation elements. And you want to mitigate these negative incidents from happening in the first place. So one of the key studies that I recently read or been digging into is the IBM's cost of a data breach, which comes out every year. And this year, they highlighted that the cost of a data breach could actually be reduced by over 80% by having key automation elements in place. A lot of like what we're talking about with CAASM and Noetic Cyber, the way that you have your approach. There's certainly a lot of savings that could be there, and you're talking millions of dollars, because the cost of a data breach is now well over $4 million US dollars. And so there's certainly a lot that's there. And in terms of the actual remediation or automated remediation, going back like 20 years ago, when IPS, IDS days, where you actually had ways that you could configure policies, and you could basically have it fail open, fail close. And that's becoming more and more relevant, where it's a policy driven solution. So getting away from these static transitions where you have a manual operator that turns things on and off and actually takes actions, which with response, speed is key. It's very important. And being able to reduce the amount of time it takes to detect and then investigate and then actually respond and remediate, that can mean millions of dollars in terms of, every second and minute that ends up going by. So I'd love to hear any additional thoughts that you have on the automation side.
Sure. Yeah, and I think so. It's an area we recognize that we need to embrace, but I think we've got to, be careful on our positioning, because there's also some concern, right? If you don't have robust processes and you apply automation, you're just going to accelerate bad things, right? So it's back to what I said at the fundamental. Automation does require certainty, so we've got to leverage it where we have that certainty of data. And that's why we're very excited about what we're doing here at Noetic, because we're taking a data science approach, we're validating the state from multiple different sources, so we know it's high fidelity. And this is more about correction than remediation, right? We're working typically below a SIM in a mature organization, and we're self-correcting the fundamental posture so it's as it should be. So what we're finding is that actually a couple of takeaways from it really. One is a lot of the more seasoned cyber professionals, they move on to their job move on from different companies because they're doing very dull and mundane work, right? And it's less intellectually stimulating, and they're feeling unfulfilled. So this frees up time for that kind of talent to work on the harder problems in the the cyber ecosystem. I think that's one key aspect. But also I think as you start to think about remediation, we've got to recognize that sometimes the cyber team don't have control over all of the aspects to do that remediation. They can identify the challenge, but often it's IT or other co-workers that they've got to collaborate with to do the remediation. And what's really refreshing that we've started to see is, because we've got that prescriptive approach, and let's say we're looking at patching and those kind of things, that could be owned by IT, but the cyber users are able to go and say, today we need to patch these 12 systems. And the reason is they have these very severe vulnerabilities. They have access to PII, they're on a share price affecting system, and let's use that as the very prescriptive thing we can go fix and win today. And that's quite refreshing, I think, to go to your IT colleagues with that level of detail and that manageability. And we're starting to see that they're connecting the Noetic capability with other IT automation tools as well, as they get the confidence to bridge the gap between the different groups and enable straight through processing in certain scenarios. So I think it's a journey that starts with confidence and certainty. We're applying it where it delivers a lot of value today, but also we're designing a system so it can collaborate and communicate with other parts of the IT landscape outside of cyber for the broader benefit of the organization.
I can totally see how this would be very valuable to almost all organizations, especially with the increase in adoption of DevSecOps and breaking down these silos between traditional IT operations and security teams. This is often a very high priority for organizations, especially as they look at ways to have operational efficiency and increase visibility, especially as it comes to continuous integration and continuous delivery models, which is becoming more and more paramount. And it's now all of these things are maturing and becoming mainstream, especially with this post-COVID operating environment. And it's a very serious value add, and certainly something that organizations should consider for the future. So what I'm going to ask you is one question I ask all vendors, which is why now? Why not 5 years ago when resilient was mainstream, and why not in the future?
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. I think, well, a couple of things come to mind. That kind of visibility gap has never been greater. digital transformation has accelerated. COVID has certainly accelerated. So, there's a tipping point on pain, right? And I think that's certainly, one factor. But also, I don't think, we had some of the building block technology that you can start to adopt available, certainly in the mainstream 4 or 5 years ago. I mentioned a few times that we've taken very much a data science approach to this. And therefore, we're not using traditional databases, we're using graph-based technology and other systems as well. And we take a lot of learning from other industries outside of cyber that are more mature. Social media is a prime example, where they're dealing with lots of entities of data and they've got to work out how they relate to each other. So I think there's a pain problem, but there's also just modern approaches, to address that. And also, I think, if you look at tooling, we've got more standardization around APIs. There's more open specifications there, so the open API spec. And also, I think we're on a journey as an industry to controls as code. So there's formative standards, think of OSCAL from NIST and others, that's starting to evolve, that are giving the specifications and standards to start to move in, in that direction, sorry. And then, just taking a step back personally, having been in the industry 30 years and been to all the major shows, I kind of felt at RSA a few years ago, there was an approach where people didn't just want the new thing. If you look at the post-breach analysis, most organizations, it's down to the fundamentals. And so we've got to relook at those hard fundamental challenges with a fresh approach and fresh tooling. And, this kind of asset inventory from a cyber perspective is foundational. And I think there's lots of companies that have got scars and failed projects. But, now's the time where the great news is, there's new approaches that can really drive value there.
I have to tell you, I absolutely love it. I love hearing the Noetic story, the name, how it came to be, how everything has evolved since the resilient days, and just overall the visibility that you're providing, and that the multi-dimensional relationships that are able to be applied programmatically and dynamically. The industry is embracing automation. It needs to be ubiquitous across all the different facets, not just detection and response. And you have to have organizations that have this business context, as well as the assurance, so they can actually implement this continuous automation. This really is great. And it's great to see the market evolve over the past couple of years. And since I started looking at attack surface management back in 2019, and it's great to see what you and the team have been able to achieve in such a short period of time.
Awesome. No, we're super excited. A long way to go, but we're certainly getting really tremendous feedback from everyone we've been engaging with in the space and telling the story in the way.